Hi everyone. Today I am going to be recording a video to show you how to use a program called DAGitty to determine what the best regression model for your class project is going to be. I hope you all are doing well, hanging in there. So as I mentioned in an earlier video, a good way to build a regression model is to think about all the potential variables that might be interacting, that might be influencing the relationship between the exposure and the outcome that you're really interested in understanding. And so regression is a way to do that. Regression is the way that we can account for confounding variables. We adjust for them by including them in our model, so we can get a better picture of how the exposure and outcome relate directly to one another without getting confused by all these other things that are going on. So this is relevant for assignment 7. So if you click on assignment 7 here in the regression and modeling section of our course website, you'll see that I have a link to DAGitty here. So it's just www.daggitty.net. And when you click on that, it takes you to a page. Sorry, I should set it to open in a new tab since I want to come back to the class page in a minute. So it takes you to this page that is for DAGitty. Again, DAG standing for directed acyclic graph, which is a way to create a causal diagram and determine what you should be adjusting for in your models. So the easiest way, the way that I typically use it, is just to use a browser version. There is a download option if you want to go that route. If you don't have reliable internet access and need to download it, let me know if you have any questions about it, but I haven't actually done it myself yet, so it may take me a little bit of trial and error to figure that out. But hopefully it'll work for you to just launch it online in your browser, so click this first option. And when you do that, it comes to this screen, which is where we're going to create our DAG, our directed acyclic graph. So the first thing that I like to do is to move these two little guys. If I can get around my, here we go, recording bar there. So as you can see over here on the left-hand side of the screen, it has a legend down at the bottom. So the green circle with the kind of triangle in it is the represents the variable that's the exposure. So it's labeled as E right now in our DAG. And then the blue variable with the vertical line in it is the outcome. So basically we want to know, does the exposure cause the outcome? And so by default, DAGitty already puts a few other variables in here. I actually often delete these, and as you might have been able to see, in order to move them around, I'm just clicking on it and then moving my mouse around to drag within the screen. So that's pretty straightforward to do. But the nice thing about DAGitty, and I will be showing you this as I go along, is that they have this easy to use how-to button here at the top. So if you don't remember how to do something, you can just click on this. Let's see. I guess they don't actually have move things, but dragging it is pretty straightforward. But what we're going to do first is delete a variable. So I'm going to get rid of the Z. I just want to make my own. So if I want to delete a variable, I'll click on that option here. So it says you can either click on a variable and then tap the delete key on your keyboard, or sorry, tap delete in the variable tab, which is over here. Or you can move the mouse over it and press the delete button on your keyboard or the D on your keyboard. So I'm going to click on this Z, and so I can either go over here and click delete. You can see now it shows that Z is what I'm talking about here. So I can delete it that way, or I'll go ahead and delete one more just to show you. Now I've clicked on A, and I'm just going to hit the delete button on my keyboard, which didn't actually work. I think I'm supposed to be hovering. Let's remind ourselves. Yes, just hover. So instead of clicking, I should just hover and then click delete. And that's still not working, but that sometimes happens in DAGitty, and that's part of why I wanted to try this different ways. That time I hovered and clicked the D, the letter D on my keyboard, and it worked. So It's important to know that sometimes things that worked last time don't work the next time. And there's always multiple ways to do something in DAGitty, so just try them all before you get too frustrated. Okay, the next thing we're gonna do is rename things. And so to rename, let's go to how to rename a variable. So we can either click it and tap rename up here in the variable tab, that'll show up again, or hover over it and click the R on the keyboard. So I can click on E and then say rename, and it'll bring up the box. And I'm gonna use the example that I used in the regression coding, the sample code that I posted, looking at whether students who are parents get adequate sleep in different amounts than students who aren't parents. So parent is gonna be shorthand for my exposure. You can write an exposure as long as you like, but just know that, kind of like in Stata, it'll get cut off if it's too long. So I try to keep my labels in DAGitty pretty short as well. So again, I clicked on it and then clicked rename up here at the left area under variable. The other option is to just hover over. So I want to change my outcome to adequate sleep. And so I'm just going to hover over it, click the R on my keyboard, and it brings me to the same place. So I'll call this adequate sleep. And then I just want to start adding confounding variables. So I left my B here from before. So I'm going to hover and click R to rename that to age, because age is one of the things that I thought, you know, students who are older are probably more likely to have kids. And as we get older, sleep tends to change a little bit. So, you know, maybe argue that among college students, the age range isn't wide enough to see age impacts on sleep, but I'm going to put it in my DAG nonetheless, because I think it's probably enough to change. So what we want to do here is add a connection. So this is currently saying, you know, our main question is whether being a parent influences the amount of adequate sleep that you get. And then confounding variables, we want to draw all the lines should be indicating causal impacts. So this line right here, from age to adequate sleep, is saying that age, biological age, influences whether or not people get adequate sleep. It can cause a change in the amount of adequate sleep that people get. So I believe that's true for the purposes of this DAG. I also believe that age influences whether or not students are parents. So I believe that people who are older are more likely to have a child or to be caring for a child. So I also want to draw an arrow from age to parent. So let's see how to do that. So that's adding a connection. So how to add a connection. And I can just click on the start variable and then on the end variable. So basically the arrow will follow the direction I click. So if I click on age and then click on parent, it draws a line from age to parent. So the arrow is pointing at parent. So the direction of the arrow does matter. It should be in the causal direction. You might have also noticed that when we did that, the color changed on age. And if we scroll down here to our legend again, it's pink means that it's an ancestor of exposure and outcome. So for the purposes of this class, we haven't gone into a lot of detail about causal diagrams, but essentially that kind of meets the traditional confounding definition that we talked about. So an ancestor just means it's a cause of. And this is a confounder in this case because, and these dark pink lines indicate, oops, didn't want to click on there, a biasing path. So down here at the bottom, the pink means a biasing path, meaning that because age is associated with both parent, or it's causally related to both parent status and sleep status, that it is biasing, it is potentially biasing this relationship that we're interested in between parent and adequate sleep. And sorry, kicking off my heater since it just came on and it's kind of loud. The other thing that changed that you might have noticed is up here at the top right of the screen. I haven't talked about this side yet, but this is actually where you're going to look at the end. So the causal effect identification is really the main purpose for using this website, is to help us identify what do we actually need to adjust for in our regression model. And by default, it's it's giving us the total effect. And so that means what's the relationship between parent status and sleep overall, accounting for any kind of pathways. And I'll show you what a pathway looks like in just a minute. And so this is saying that in order to really estimate the total effect of parent status on adequate sleep, we need to adjust for age. So right now, if this were my entire causal diagram, I would run in Stata a model that said logistic, adequate sleep, I.parent, and I.age. So that means logistic regression model with adequate sleep as the outcome. Remember that in my sample code, I made it a dichotomous yes-no variable. And then we're using parent status, yes, no, as our primary exposure. And then age, like everything else in our campus wellness data set, is a qualitative variable or a categorical one. And so we're just doing I.age, which will represent people 17 to 20 versus 21 and older. So right now, all we need to adjust for is age. There are a couple other options in this dropdown, which you don't need to worry about for this class. I just want to mention that the direct effect option would be if there were pathways that we knew about and you didn't want to include those, you wanted to know what's the relationship between parent status and sleep independent of any other causal pathways, you could do the direct effect option. Now, right now, it doesn't change what we need to adjust for. We still need to adjust for age. But let's keep going, and I'll show you that that does change in a minute. Okay. Oh, the last option on there is instrumental variable, and that's an approach to adjusting for confounding where you only adjust for an instrumental variable rather than the confounding variables directly. But again, we won't do that in this class. It's a little bit more advanced. Okay, so some other things that I'd mentioned in previous classes, previous examples that I would be concerned about are work. So let's say the amount of time that you work. Oh wait, I don't think I've showed you this yet. So I want to add a new variable now. So to add a variable, we can just click anywhere on the canvas, that being this gray screen, which is why when I keep trying to scroll around, I keep clicking on the middle of the screen and it wants to add a variable. So that's pretty easy to do. I just click any gray part of the screen. And then I'm going to say amount of work. And then I have to think about, and this is where you all will be doing some literature searching to find what is causally related. But let's say I've done that work already and I found that, yes, the amount of time that you work impacts the amount of sleep that you get. Also, whether or not you're a parent impacts how much you can work. So this time, instead of the arrow going from work to parent, because we're not saying that how much you work influences whether or not you become a parent or guardian, we're saying it the other way around, that if you're a parent or guardian, that will impact the amount of time that you work. So that arrow goes from parent to amount of work. And let's say we also think that, you know, your age influences how much you work. So again, maybe older people are more likely to be able to work more hours. They have more experience, and so they're more likely to get hired. Okay, so our model's starting to get a little bit more complicated, but we can check over here again, and we still just need to adjust for age for the total effect. Now, if we look at the direct effect, again, this is saying if the direct effect would be what is the parent sleep relationship independent of any effects through the work variable here. So that's why the direct effect adjustment now looks different. But again, for class, I want you to just focus on the total effect unless you have really strong reasons not to, and we could talk about those individually. So I also think that financial concerns might be relevant here. So clearly how much you work might impact your financial concerns, because if you're working, you might be earning more. But independently, being a parent can create some financial concerns. We also might think that age is causally related to having financial concerns, but I don't think it impacts sleep. Let's say, though, that I accidentally drew this line to sleep. If I want to remove that, if you say how to delete a connection, so deleting this line from financial concerns to sleep, we can just basically redo the arrow. So click on the starting variable and on the end. So the arrow is already going from financial concerns to sleep. So if I just do that again, click financial concerns and then click sleep, it takes that arrow away. So pretty easy to fix that. Also, if you drew an arrow in the wrong direction, it's pretty easy to flip around. The same way you just go from the variable to the other variable that you want to move it to. Oops, hold on. Well, that took it away. But if I wanted it that way instead, I can turn it around pretty easily. Now, it's not possible, we've talked about this in class, we can't influence age, right? So it's not possible that this arrow would be going this direction. Financial concerns cannot change how old you are. So that line doesn't make sense. But one concerning thing happened when we drew that line, and that is that now up here in the top right, it says we can't estimate the total effect by covariate adjustment. And usually that happens when you create a circle within your DAG. So remember, these are called directed acyclic graphs, which means you can't have a circle within your causal model. And you can see this might be the issue here. It goes from parent status to financial concerns to age back to parent status. So this is a circle that's happening right here between these variables. And so that is most commonly the reason that you get this message. So if you run into that and can't figure out where you're going wrong or why you can't estimate the total effect, look for those circles, but you can also let me know and I can try to help you with that. Okay, so I may want to add some more variables here, but that gives you kind of the overview of DAGitty, the main points, the things you'll need to be doing. And again, once you get everything that you want in your DAG, and don't just limit to yourself to things that are in the data set, this really should be any causal relationships. So, you know, even if it's something that's not on the campus wellness assessment, go ahead and put it in your DAG, and we'll see, you know, if it tells you you need to adjust for something that wasn't in there, that'll just become a limitation in your discussion. You'll say, well, we really needed to adjust for, let's say, you know, some health condition that impacts sleep and is more common among parents. We didn't ask about a lot of health conditions in the campus wellness assessment, so that wouldn't be in there. But I would just say, you know, really to understand this relationship, we should have adjusted for apnea diagnosis, for example. But we weren't able to because we didn't collect that piece of data. But I would still want to put it in here. So let's say I'm concerned about sleep apnea. And so we know that that's associated with sleep. We know it's more common as you get older. And let's say, I don't actually think that this is true, but I don't know for sure. But let's say there's evidence that being a parent is associated with sleep apnea as well. And maybe apnea influences how much you work. So the good news is I put in these connections and actually it doesn't influence our adjustment. We still just need to adjust for age. So the fact that sleep apnea isn't in our data set is actually fine. If, for example, let's turn this arrow around and see if that makes a difference. Oops, I really just want a one-sided arrow. Here we go. So let's say that there were evidence that sleep apnea actually influences whether or not you have kids. I think that's a stretch, but let's say that that's the case. You can see now the program is saying we need to adjust for sleep apnea. So this is where I would need to talk about that as a limitation. I'll also say that as you build bigger models, if there were more variables in here, sometimes DAGitty will give you'll have more than one bullet point here. So there's different sets of variables you could adjust for. And so it may be that you don't have every variable in the first bullet, but in the second bullet, we have everything in the campus wellness assessment. So it'll just take a little bit of time to figure out exactly what you have, what you need, what you can adjust for. But this is what I want you to work on with your group in order to do assignment 7. Build your DAG and then run a regression model based on it. So I'm going to delete my sleep apnea here since that wasn't real. So again, if I were doing assignment 7, I would share this DAG and then run the model adjusting just for age. So that's the only thing I need to include. So how do you share the model? Well, you can do a print screen. So on my computer, I do control and then there's a print screen button at the top. The other thing, the thing I actually recommend that you do for multiple reasons is if you see down here on the right hand side of the screen, there's a model code area. So you can actually just copy all of this. There's not really a way to save your DAG within the program. I imagine if you download the whole thing that you could do that. But in the web-based version, once I close this window, it's gone. But you can save the code. So if you highlight and then just Control C to copy, and let's say you make a, I need to move this again. You can do a Google Doc, and share it with your group. And just paste it here. So that's the code from my DAGitty window. So I'm going to close out of this. And so it's gone. I have a blank screen here now. But all I need to do now is go back over here and copy and paste all of this code into this window here. Oops. So I'm just going to delete all that. Control V to paste it in, and then you click this update DAG button, important step, because otherwise it doesn't do it automatically. And there you can see my DAG is back to the way it was. So that's the way that I recommend you save your DAG, and so you can just submit that code to me with the assignment if you want, and so I can open it up myself within DAGitty and see what you did and make sure that your model matches what was here. But again, if you want to just do a print screen and attach that, that's fine too. So hopefully that helps. Let me know if you have any questions. Again, the how-to button is your friend, and this top right area is where you want to look at the end to decide what you need to adjust for. So that's it for now. Contact me with any questions. Thanks.